Now, I may not understand all the reasoning behind God's choice to use this little nation of Israel, but Israel, as you often say, Jimmy, is special to God by covenant.
That's right.
He's just made a covenant.
That's right.
And whether I understand it or not is immaterial and irrelevant.
Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad that you're joining me today. I've got a very special interview coming up in just a minute. But before we do that, let me just remind you that we have our Israel trip coming up this year, November 29th through December the 8th. It's Pastor Ed Young Jr. of Fellowship Church here in Grapevine, Texas. Myself, we're going to the Holy Land. We would love to have you go with us on endtimes.com. You can go there. It'll give you all the details there of how you can sign up. We're filling up, and this trip will fill up. So if you're wanting to go and you haven't signed up yet, go on endtimes.com and sign up. We're going to go all through the Holy Land. We were there in December. It's just always such an incredible blessing. And it's really a blessing to be there with other believers. We'll have our expert tour guides. We'll have a number of buses. We'll have expert tour guides on every single bus. Pastor Ed and I will be there teaching at different sites through the Holy Land. And I can't wait to meet a lot of you. You know, I just have really two opportunities through the year to get to meet you guys. One is at our conference that's coming up next September, and I'll be talking about that more next week. But also this Israel trip. I look forward to being able to shake your hand and get to know you and spend some time with you in the Holy Land. So if you're interested in going to Israel with us, endtimes.com. Go on there, you get more information and sign up. We'd love to have you join us there. It's a great pleasure today to have my good friend Max Lucado joining me on the show. Max is a teaching minister at Oak Hills Church in San Antonio. He isn't just a best-selling Christian author. Except for the Bible, he is the best-selling Christian author of all times with 92 million of his books in print. I know most of you watching and listening right now have been blessed by Max's books and ministry. But today he's here with me to talk about the end times. Max, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Jimmy. You know, I hold you in such high esteem. I love you. And I'm honored and grateful that we have this opportunity for this conversation.
Well, I feel the same way about you, Max, and I very much appreciate your friendship and encouragement over the years. You have a gift of being able to communicate truth in such an understandable way. And, you know, people love it, and people love your books, love your teaching, your preaching, your ministry. But you've had a journey that we've talked about concerning the end times. You had a certain view that we call amillennialism, and we talk about it here on endtimes.com. But you've made a progression. Is that right? You've changed your view.
Yeah, it is. You know, I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I embraced the view of teaching that the Revelation 20 description of the millennium was symbolic. And I was raised in an amillennial church. I attended a college that taught me amillennialism. I have never had a premillennial professor, premillennial pastor, or even been a part of a premillennial class. But little by little, over the years, I moved from one point of view to the other and embraced more of a literal view of the millennium. It's really important, though, that I say that I am so grateful to God for my amillennial professors, my amillennial pastors. They taught me about Jesus. They taught me to love Scripture. They inspired me to dig deep into the Word, and also challenged me that when I encountered a teaching that was contrary to what I had been taught, that let not many of you be teachers, for you will be held in higher account. And so be careful. And if you feel the Lord leading you in a direction, then you pursue that. And that's what has happened on 2 or 3 different topics in my life, one of which is end times. And so I'm really grateful to have this chance to explain that journey, talk about that journey with you and your audience.
Well, this is the first opportunity I've ever had to really talk to someone who made that progression. Mm-hmm. It seems like in so many cases, people get kind of, stuck in their position and they're not willing to change like you did, which, I have such a great respect for you just in your ministry in general, but being able to say, hey, I can't really support this position that I was raised with. Biblically, I honor my past and my tradition and the people who, were there, but I'm gonna make this progression over here. Let's talk about just kind of defining terms here for just a minute. Define amillennialism, what you mean when you say that.
Amillennialists look at the description of the 1,000-year reign of Christ as portrayed in Revelation chapter 20 as a time in which we're living now. Right. That Christ is reigning now. That we are experiencing the millennium currently, that we're in that golden age right now. And I'm sure there are a variety of reasons for that. What I was taught is to be very careful about any literal interpretation of end times teaching. And consequently, when Jesus speaks about the tribulation in the Olivet Discourse, or the Apostle John talks about the millennium in Revelation 20, those are symbols. Those are metaphors. I get that. I understand that. But one of the reasons that I changed has to do with what I think is a healthier approach to end times teaching. And I think we'll talk about that here in just a second. But amillennialism leans towards symbolic, correct? You'd understand this more than anyone, and that we're in that time right now.
Yeah. And an amillennialist believes that the devil was bound basically at the resurrection of Christ. Yeah. That we are now in the reign of Christ that would be described as the millennium. That's a perfect explanation of it. Premillennialism is what you now espouse. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. And, there's some huge ramifications for this. Mainly, we want to be as biblical as possible while holding everyone in mutual respect.
Right.
But we want to be as biblical as possible. All Christians agree upon the literal, physical return of Jesus to earth and the bodily resurrection of the dead and the final judgment of all people. We can all find common ground right there. But apparently, the Holy Spirit wants us to have a more detailed understanding of what is yet to come, and understand. And it's as if we've been handed an itinerary of what to expect. Right. And that empowers the saint. It helps us understand the problems of the present because we know what's going to happen in the future.
That's exactly right. So we're going to talk about the progression that you've made. You have a teaching, you have an explanation of how you defend, because you can scripturally defend your position now, premillennialism. In other words, you didn't just make this jump, in a hurry or without reason. And and I just want to say to all of our viewers, everyone watching this right now or listening, this is excellent. This is the best explanation I've ever heard of premillennialism and how you can defend this, because there are people, and because I love what you're saying about unity, Max, and about honor, because we just don't divide over eschatology. We just don't divide fellowship because this person over here is amillennial and I'm premillennial. And I know how that's how you feel, and that's what you've been saying.
Absolutely.
And so, but there are words that go back and forth. For example, I know from the amillennial camp, there is the teaching that John Nelson Darby, the rapture and, the dispensational theology really didn't begin until the 18th century. And a lot of amillennials, they'll use that argument that it's a very recent teaching, but you're going to explain here. So let's go through. You have an acrostic, and I want you to go point by point, and we'll talk about it when you finish each point. But again, to all of our viewers here, this is an excellent explanation of how you can defend premillennialism. Go ahead, Max.
Well, I got the idea of an acrostic from our mutual friend, Mark Hitchcock.
Yeah, sure.
In his book, The End, which is such an astoundingly wonderful book.
Yes.
He has a chapter in which he describes his defense of being a premillennialist and he has an acrostic, Premill, P-R-E-M-I-L. And I thought, now that's so clever. As I began to sense a shift in my own heart, I wanted to be able to explain this because, again, many of my friends are amillennial. I'm going to have to tell former pastors and professors, friends, why I've made this change, and I'm happy to do so. Yeah. I'm happy to do so, but I sometimes have trouble remembering things. I've watched you teach, Jimmy, and you just seem to have instant recall. I have to use every tool in the book. And so I created this acrostic, and the acrostic is C-H-R-I-S-T. And these are the reasons that I believe that it's more biblical to embrace a literal reign of Christ on earth. And again, this is essential because if there's going to be a reign of Christ on earth, that's going to impact my view of the rapture.
That's right.
It's going to impact my view of the tribulation. It's going to impact my view of how many judgments there are. Is there a Bema Seat judgment and Great White Throne judgment, or is there just one judgment? Yeah. And so these are important conversations. I was explaining it the other day like this, and I think it helped. Imagine that you inherit a garden, and that garden has a beautiful fountain in it. And you have to decide if you think that fountain was supposed to be there or if you can remove it. Well, the millennium is kind of like that. You have to decide if the teaching on the millennium is supposed to be there or if you have the liberty to remove it. And how you respond will dictate the way you treat the rest of the garden. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And, and again, when you start teaching on this acrostic here in just a minute, it's going to make perfect sense. But when you remove the millennium from your end times theology, you've got some major scriptural problems.
You do.
And this is what you're going to talk about. So go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So C-H-R-I-S-T. Thank you again for letting me talk about this. C reminds me of the phrase covenants yet unfulfilled. I believe that covenants govern end times. That covenant, God has made promises, specific promises, and that the place for me as I began studying end times is not so much in the prophecies, but in the covenants. That God has made some promises, and He is a covenant-keeping God, and He has to fulfill these. And so the only way that these covenants can be fulfilled is in a literal reign of Christ. Let me just give you 2 or 3 examples. Now, we could talk the whole time about just this covenant, but the earliest covenant is Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. And then Adam and Eve are told to have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Now, we know what happened. God gave this instruction to Adam and Eve to rule over and to subdue creation. And this creation is on the earth, yeah, not in heaven. Adam was created to oversee it, but he didn't. With temptation came the rebellion and the fall and the curse. Consequently, humanity has fallen away from its intended position to oversee the earth. I don't know anybody who's commanding beluga whales these days. So what does God do about this covenant? Does He just say, oh, they messed up, so I'm changing my plan? I don't think so. I think the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. In our lives, we have to change horses in the middle of the stream, but God doesn't. God doesn't. And the way this covenant will be fulfilled, or one way it'll be fulfilled, is a time in which we will reign with Him. As 2 Timothy 2:12 says, we will reign with Him. A fulfilled covenant demands that there be a time in which we reign with Christ on the earth, and we subdue creation. We don't oppress creation, but we oversee creation. That's just one example of a covenant yet unfilled. And then the other covenant that's especially important, although I have about 4 or 5 here, but the other covenant is the promise of God to Abraham about Israel. Blessings to Abraham for his life, the blessing of many descendants for Abraham, and then most of all, the guarantee of a specific piece of land forever. Genesis 15 and verse 18. God said, to your descendants, I will give this land. Now, this land includes modern-day Israel, plus parts of Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq. This covenant has yet to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
It's yet to be fulfilled. Now, if God doesn't keep his promise to Israel, how do I know he'll keep his promise to me?
That's right.
So this is a high-stakes question. Now, I may not understand all the reasoning behind God's choice to use this little nation of Israel, but Israel, as you often say, Jimmy, is special to God by covenant.
That's right.
He's just made a covenant.
That's right.
And whether I understand it or not is immaterial and irrelevant. But God has made this covenant. He's a covenant-keeping God. So a millennium allows for this covenant to be fulfilled. A millennium, a 1,000-year reign in which Christ reigns on the earth, in which he gifts Israel with this promised property, allows for that. The amillennial position says, well, that's all symbolic. God didn't really make that promise, or he did make it and the people didn't fulfill it, and so God had to change his mind. I think millennialism, premillennialism, allows me to respect the covenants of God.
Yes.
And embrace them. And that's a huge issue, because if God can't keep his covenants to Adam and Eve, to Abraham, how do I know he can keep his covenants to save my soul?
It's just so well said. So I want to ask you about Israel related to amillennialists. For example, amillennialism, replacement theology flows out of amillennialism. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so they simply believe that the church has replaced Israel, because Israel after AD 70 didn't exist until 1948. And of course now they do exist again. How does the amillennialist view what's happening right now? Is Israel, they see it as just immaterial and just kind of a lucky thing, or do they think there's anything significant to it?
1948 sure changed the game, didn't it?
It sure did.
Well, I mean, everything changed. I think it would have been easier to be an amillennialist before Israel was returned to their native land. That's the super sign of end times, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That really, and I can empathize with somebody, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, say, well, Israel could never have that property again. I could empathize and say, okay, so I will take another view. But now that Israel has been given that property, does that not encourage me? Does it not show me that God can do this?
Yeah.
God can do this. He can work miracles. And the fact that that happened should encourage me to see that God can do even more. But yeah, and as a minister, Jimmy, for many years, had you asked me, I would have said, well, really, we are Israel. Yeah. We are Israel, we the church. And so what happens to ethnic Israel or the nation of Israel is secondary. And that's the position I took, and the position still taken by many amillennialists today.
Do you think that amillennialism necessarily breeds anti-Semitism? Because I know you've never been anti-Semitic, but there are, I heard, and let me just say, I heard a very well-known leader in the Christian leader say one time that Israel is an armpit of a nation in the Middle East that means nothing. And I challenged him on that statement, and that's an extreme position, but now I'm telling you, this is a very popular guy. And I challenged him on his position, and I honestly think he's changed since then. But do you see in the churches that you were raised in, the Bible college you went to, the seminary, did you experience anti-Semitism there?
Not a bit.
Yeah,
not
good.
a bit.
Good.
Not a bit.
Yeah.
I guess I could envision a logical consequence of amillennialism leading to that, but I didn't experience, just the contrary. Highest respect, highest appreciation for the Jews and for what God did through them to send our Savior, to give us the Scripture, to start the church. So I didn't sniff out any
Good.
anti-Semitism in my teaching.
Good. Okay, number 2, the H.
Okay, I like this one. I mean, I like them all. I like them all, but this was really a significant game changer, and that's the history of the early church. So we're working down this acrostic: covenants, history, and then we'll look at RIST. But the history of the early church, I was really surprised to learn that for the first 300 years of church history, the leaders were premillennial.
Yes.
Most significant among them was Papia, the bishop of Hierapolis, a disciple of none other than the Apostle John.
Wow.
Man, I nearly fell out of my chair when I read this. Because here's a student of the Apostle John who taught and promoted premillennialism. If the student of the inspired apostle who wrote the book of Revelation taught students or taught people to embrace the literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, that pretty well seals the deal for me. And then we could add to that, I've got my list here, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, who said, I and every other Orthodox Christian feel certain that there will be a resurrection of the flesh, followed by 1,000 years in the rebuilt, embellished, and enlarged city of Jerusalem, as was announced by the prophets of Ezekiel, Isaiah, and others.
Wow.
So the fact that the fathers of our faith embraced the promise of an earthly reign of Jesus is extremely compelling to me.
Extremely compelling. And again, because I've been premillennial for a long time, there is this constant statement that is made that dispensational theology really was invented, and I do agree that John Nelson Darby and Schofield and others, they defined it. They
Right.
helped us understand it, but they didn't invent it, because as you're saying, the early church fathers, for the first 300 years, all the early church fathers were premillennial. They believed in a literal millennium, and the rather than premillennialism being new, amillennialism, and I know it started about the 4th century, but still, it's the newer teaching, not premillennialism.
Jimmy, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you have a sense for what caused amillennialism to begin, what the seeds of the teaching were? If for the first 300 years the church believed in the 1,000-year reign, was there a key teacher or a moment, or do you have a sense for that question?
Yes, it was Platonic dualism. It was one of the reasons. Plato taught that everything material was evil and everything spiritual was good. This is where Docetism came from. Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. Thank you for joining me today. On today's show, I have with me two of our main contributors to endtimes.com, Dr. Mark Hitchcock and our Israel correspondent, Brian Schrager. We're going to be talking about breaking news this week in Syria and the implications for Israel and the Middle East, as well as Russia and other countries. I have Mark here in the studio with me. Brian is from Jerusalem. I want to go to Brian first. Brian, tell us what's happening related to Syria there in Jerusalem.
Well, there's cautious optimism or optimistic caution, however you want to phrase it. On the one hand, it's wonderful to see Assad overthrown. He was a great enemy of Israel. He was certainly a tool of Iran. He was facilitating Iran's transportation of weapons, and especially weapons, to Hezbollah. And there were a lot of depots and weapons manufacturing things going on there. In many ways, Iran had made Damascus one of its own centers of power. And it certainly was a center in terms of the bridge or the road, quote unquote, road it had going from Tehran to the Mediterranean. And that road has now been cut off. So Assad has been removed. He was an evil man. There's no other way to put it. The things he did were beyond horrific. So there's celebration that he's gone. On the other hand, this group coming in, they're making nice. Their rhetoric is very, we want love, we want peace, we want to respect human rights, we want to give, women don't have to wear hijab, they can go to university. And yet they are a jihadist group, right? So, they do have their roots in Al-Qaeda. And there is some memory, of course, of Afghanistan. Remember when those Islamic, when they came in, they said, "Oh, we're going to respect the rights of women," and they had all kinds of nice, positive things to say. Well, there turned out to be a big difference between what they said and what they did, and so that's Israel's concern right now. What exactly is HTS going to do? How will they behave? And it's very impressive to me sitting here to see how quickly Israel moved to do what it had to do to protect its border with Syria, which is, I'm sure they've always kept an eye on it, but they have really moved in quickly. They're building a big barrier now. They've taken the Syrian Mount Hermon, that site, which was Syria in the Golan Heights. They've moved in just a little bit into Syria to establish a buffer zone. They don't want to have an enemy right on their border like they've had with Hezbollah for the last more than a year, or several years actually, but especially this last year or 14 months since October 8, 2023. And they've been bombing, even in Jerusalem, we hear the jets going overhead as they go to bomb in Syria. What they're bombing is they're bombing the weapons depots, they're bombing the weapons manufacturing facilities, they're bombing Syrian army military bases, right? They don't want to leave any weapons or material that has not already been acquired by the rebels to them. So things have moved quickly. Now, it's interesting because in the last 24 hours, it has slowed down a bit, and the media focus here has shifted from, at least for the time being, from Syria to Netanyahu testifying at his trial, which is another subject matter. But that's kind of where the attention has gone here in Israeli media.
Well, that's probably a good thing, I mean, in the sense that you're not being attacked directly. So, Mark, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Well, talk about the prophetic implications, because Syria. Now, they're not specifically mentioned in the Gog and Magog war,
right?
And they're one of the countries that would accompany Gog and Magog. You think?
Yeah. I think they are. Yeah, I think when you have the many peoples with you,
right.
Kind of Gog Magog, you have kind of, I call it the outer ring of nations,
right?
Russia and Turkey and Iran, and you have Libya and Sudan,
right.
And then I think when it says in Ezekiel 38:6, many peoples with you, it probably includes those inner nations that are there. So I think it's significant for that. I think it's also very significant in just the whole clamoring for peace.
Yeah.
It just continues. It's just more and more chaos and disorder in that part of the world. But it's also a little bit of a reordering and a realignment of those Gog Magog nations.
Yes.
Because you had Iran and Russia that were present there in Syria. They kind of were the ascendant nations there. Well, all of a sudden, really Iran's whole terror network in many ways is disintegrated. It's being shattered.
Really?
Hamas has been taken down. Hezbollah has been taken down. Now Syria. And really it's through Syria that they were arming Hezbollah. So that's really been cut off. This whole Shiite crescent that they tried to develop has been taken out. They still have these militia groups in Iraq. They still have the Houthis down in Yemen, but basically it's been shattered. And so what's happened, I think, to me it's fascinating. The three main nations in Gog Magog, I believe, are Russia and Iran and Turkey. Four of the places mentioned are in modern-day Turkey. Well, Russia basically now has retreated. Iran now is basically out, but now it's Turkey has kind of become the ascendant nation. They've kind of risen to the fore. And they have a 560-mile border with Syria.
Wow.
And they actually effectively control part of northern Syria.
Right.
So they're kind of now the major player. So, it just kind of shows us, I think, that as these things unfold, that there's a lot of twists and turns, but it's still the same basic nations that are together. Well, I just read it. There's an article I read recently that Turkey and Russia and Iran are meeting in Doha, which is in Qatar, to kind of hammer out how they're going to withdraw and retreat and get out of this situation. So you still have those three key nations that are mentioned. So it was kind of Russia and Iran. Now it's Turkey, and it'll probably continue. There'll be interplay between those nations, but it's fascinating. But it's fascinating to me how quickly it can change.
Oh my goodness!
Just this was lightning speed. 8 days basically that all this took place. Even caught the intelligence community by surprise. But I do think it has prophetic implications in those ways. I'm going to talk about in my program on Thursday about the Isaiah 17, the Damascus.
Yes.
I take a little bit different view on that than some people do. So I'm going to talk about that in light of these events that are happening. So I'll save that for then.
Good. Well, your show's great. Brian always does a great job. So right now what's happening, let's talk about Russia for just a minute. Now, I'm just shocked. President Biden has released over $100 billion to Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Trump broke them. They were on the verge of bankruptcy when Biden became president. He's released over $100 billion to them, and it's just amazing to me how fragile they are. Mm-hmm. Now, they're enriching uranium right now. They have openly stated they're enriching uranium. I read an article this morning, I think you've stated this before. It is believed, and Brian, I want you to speak into this, it's believed that they probably have enough nuclear material for at least one nuclear warhead. Is that correct, Brian?
Actually, a report came out just yesterday from Israel Defense, a publication called Israel Defense. It said that according to U.S. sources, Iran now has enough fissile material to produce 12 nuclear weapons.
Wow. Wow.
It has it right now. So, I mean, this is obviously Israel's biggest concern.
Right.
When the rebels came in and took Damascus and evicted Assad, Israel rapidly moved, as mentioned a few minutes ago, to defend itself on that border. But all of its statements made it very, very clear that it was keeping a very close eye on Iran. As Mark just said, Iran has been crippled. It's been basically taken out, at least for the time being, of having a global caliphate, having the Shia crescent. What must it do to restore prestige? And there's all kinds of evidence that they have been rapidly accelerating the quality of their uranium to weapons grade level. And we heard them pledge just, 4 or 5 weeks ago that we were going to do whatever it takes to get back at Israel. Nothing will stop us. We will do anything. They were saying we will go nuclear. They said they had a fatwa against producing nuclear weapons, which is an Islamic decree that we won't do it. Well, Israel's always suspected that they will find a reason to do away with that fatwa. And we saw that argument presenting itself just a few weeks ago when they said, if there's anything that threatens our existence, we will produce a nuclear weapon. So they've already laid out their pathway, their justification around this fatwa to go nuclear. And it looks to me like that's exactly what they're doing right now. They are racing toward the development of nuclear weapons, to become a nuclear power. That will put them right back in the cat seat.
Yeah.
Bird seat.
Well, President Trump stated openly that they should bomb the nuclear facilities, that Israel should bomb the nuclear facilities. Biden said don't bomb their oil facilities or their nuclear facilities. And so Israel had to be careful. I mean, if they violated the Biden administration, if we stopped sending them arms and stopped, our naval assets in that area from protecting Israel, they'd be in real trouble. And so they had to be careful. Well, it's interesting because with President Trump being inaugurated here in a little over a month, it's going to be interesting to see if that creates any more boldness in Israel to bomb their nuclear facilities, or if they're going to wait until he is inaugurated and very quickly thereafter the U.S. and Israel bomb their nuclear facilities together. I read an article this morning that Israel said that Israel does not have heavy enough bombs to bomb the nuclear facilities inside their mountains, but the United States does. And so they would need the partnership of the United States to be able to destroy those inside mountain nuclear facilities. And so do you think that They have to act. I mean, I just don't see how they don't act related to this.
Right. Yeah, those facilities are hardened. In fact, sometimes they have to drop those bunker busters like one after another, kind of one on top of another. But the whole situation in Syria has really accelerated Iran's desire to get nuclear weapons. There's an article in Haaretz that's the title is "As Syria Collapses, Will Iran Go for the Nuclear Bomb to Reclaim Regional Deterrence?" So really, Iran has had a couple of things that they've kind of relied on. One is their ballistic missiles.
Right.
Well, when they've attacked Israel, those ballistic missiles, we've seen that those they don't work.
Yeah.
And then they had Hezbollah, which was kind of their main proxy there to the north in Lebanon to come against Israel. Well, they've been neutralized. Now they got a ceasefire.
Yeah.
So Iran now is more and more. They feel more and more isolated. They feel more and more in danger. I really think in Iran right now, I've not really read this widely, but a few people have intimated the idea that the Iranian regime is a little fearful of regime change as well.
Yes.
Because when you see what's happened in Syria, of course, you had the Arab Spring years ago. In Egypt, you had regime change in Libya, in some different places, and now it's happened there that they're fearful. So this is kind of their final card, if you will, that they can play, and so they're accelerating this even more. Because of what's happened. And so I do think that Israel will do something at some point. And I think if President Trump is elected, something will happen, which I heard a commentator the other day, a military commentator, talk about this next month as a perilous period, because they know that when President Trump comes into office, things will change. Yeah. So they've got this window of time, Iran does, when they may try to do everything that they can do to create havoc or to move forward on their nuclear plans or whatever. So I think it's a very interesting window of time right now.
Yeah, it really is. I want to talk about Russia for just a minute. I've got an article here. This is from the Wall Street Journal, and it says, retreat of Syrian forces threatens Saigon moment for Russia. Let me read just a little bit of this. It says, a fast advancing rebel offensive in Syria threatens to dislodge Russia from a strategic linchpin that Moscow has used for a decade to project power in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, and into the African continent. It also challenges Russian President Vladimir Putin's efforts to portray Moscow as a flag bearer for an alternative global order to rival Western liberalism, and his defense of the Syrian regime as evidence of a successful pushback against American dominance in the region. So now, Brian, Russia has bases, Air Force bases there in Syria, right?
They do, and they've got a big port on the Mediterranean there as well.
You think this threatens that, the regime change?
They certainly think so. I mean, they moved one of their major ships that is used to transport goods in and out off the coast a few days ago, just before Assad was evicted. So, and they've moved out. They're not there right now. Now, that doesn't mean they're gone forever. They may very well come back. There will be a lot of negotiations going on in the next days, weeks with the HTS group that's now taken over. So, yeah, Russia it's one reason that they were able to move in, because Russia was not able to effectively protect Assad. He had basically three, Hezbollah, which was taken out of the equation by Israel, Russia, which was taken out of the equation by its own war in Ukraine, and to some degree Iran, although there were mixed feelings there. But they all disappeared, and that's what allowed this takeover to happen. So Russia's not out of the game, but it is right now distracted and weakened by what's happening in Ukraine.
Well, the regime change is Muslim. They're Sunnis. And there's a natural enmity between the Sunnis and the Shias, and of course Iran the Shia.
Right.
And so they don't get along. Now it'll be interesting to see if there's some negotiation there, if they come up with some kind of an arrangement. But I don't see how, and I agree with what you said earlier, Brian. They're liars. Now these people, they don't have any problem lying to advance their agenda. But when they say that they want women to dress however they want and to be educated and all those kind of things, that's not how the Muslim world works. I mean, the radical Muslim world works. And so related to this new regime, this ISIS basically, or Al-Qaeda, whatever you want to call them, is that, do you believe that they will be a hardened Islamic state against Israel?
Well, they've been fighting ISIS. This group, HTS, has been fighting against ISIS. They broke away from Al Qaeda in like 2017. Again, they're Sunnis. The Alawite sect that Assad was part of was a little more favorable towards Shia, and that's what Hezbollah. But they have a common enemy, which is Israel, which brings them all together. Time will tell. The Taliban, when they came in and we left Afghanistan, they said they were going to allow women to be educated and be more liberal, and none of that's ever happened.
Right.
So what you've said, they lie about this. They're going to try to do all they can, probably while they're trying to kind of, let things settle down there to curry favor with different nations, and for the U.S. not to hit these, chemical sites and all that is hard. But time will tell how much they're going to be, but they're certainly not going to be. It's not going to be an open society. It's nothing compared to a Western country, but it could be less hard line than other places. You were talking earlier about Russia's bases there. I read several articles. Evidently Assad is in Moscow. That's where he fled to Moscow, but that they made some arrangement with him before he left. The Russians did, got some kind of assurances with him about their bases. Now, I don't know really how that works because he's not there now, but they received something evidently that satisfied them, and so they allowed him to seek refuge in Moscow, which I think is interesting. It again shows how intertwined they are.
Yeah, there's so many factions, Brian, within Syria, because I read this morning there's still 900 American troops with the Kurds in northeastern Syria, and then you have a very pro-Turkish sect or region just south of Turkey there in northern Syria. So it could be that one of those sects has some kind of control over those military bases or whatever. So Brian, you have an article I think that you were going to read there.
Well, there are a couple articles. One was that was especially interesting is that it was, as a question was posed in the title, is Turkey set to become the new regional power instead of Iran? So there's already thoughts that Turkey is moving into a place where it can establish a global caliphate. And there has been a quiet, if you will, competition between Turkey and Iran for some time, between Erdogan and Khamenei. Erdogan wants to bring back the Ottoman Empire. Turkey, of course, wants to establish its vision, its Shiite vision of a caliphate, where they bring in, where they lay the red carpet down for the Mahdi, their Messiah figure. What's happened now is it appears this door is open for Turkey to move in and perhaps take the lead with its vision for the establishment of a global caliphate. It's just fascinating because both parties, Shia, Sunni, they want this global caliphate, this global government. So the question right now is, who's going to prevail in that vision? The Shia vision by Iran or the Sunni vision by Erdogan? So the question is out there. Will Turkey come in? As far as the rapid change, one article I have said that Iran is now a cornered rat, and that kind of goes to the argument that they may very well be racing toward the development of a nuclear weapon or weapons. And another, I thought, especially poignant sentence in an article by Eric Mandel, who I interviewed 3 or 4 weeks ago. He said, what does he say? He said that things have happened so quickly. The lesson is that those who think they know what's coming next in Syria, and frankly, anywhere in the region, are fooling themselves. Things happen very, very quickly. And that to me is the big lesson.
Brian, for your sake and all the people in Israel, I pray that you do have a period of time, the hostages are released, and that there is peace in Israel, so that you guys can heal and recover from that.
Amen. And I encourage everyone watching, please continue to intercede on Israel's behalf. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the hostages. Pray for Israel's security. As these enemies are being defeated, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, there are more enemies out there. And the threats, sadly, don't disappear. If anything, in some ways they increase, especially if Iran, for instance, is going nuclear. So yes, please continue to pray.
Thank you. Brian, thank you for joining me. Mark, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah.
It's been great having you guys with me. And thank you for joining me today on the Tipping Point Show. We're really glad that you're here. If you're not a subscriber to endtimes.com, go there right now, endtimes.com. Become a subscriber for $7 a month. We'd love to have you be a part of our community. Also, you can go to endtimes.com. You can donate. There's a donate button there. And you can give a one-time gift, or you can also give a recurring gift that comes in every month, or however often you want to give. It's a blessing to us, and it helps us to continue to do what we do and to reach more people. Thank you again for joining me here today. Mark will have a show that's coming on tomorrow, the Marking the End Times, where he's talking about Isaiah 17 and Damascus, and so tune in for that. God bless you. I'll see you next.